everybody, and welcome to the second theory video on Rao's lunar eclipse position. If you haven't watched the first one, do that first. This video will be a continuation on that. So in the first video, we covered night H4 lines, one night H4, and there is one thing that I didn't clear up is that we left off in the video with me thinking that perhaps this bishop e3 line seems to be winning, but after bishop e3, this move rook hg8 is actually, so this move bishop takes e7, which I was exploring in the last video, is a mistake. And this line, rook hg8, this line is the main move, and it is not inaccuracy, because after rook hg8, and bishop takes g6, the move that can be played here instead of bishop takes g6, which is losing, is rook takes g6. And the reason that rook takes g6 is not losing is because after knight takes g6, bishop takes g6, h4, black's bishop on d6 is in time to just take on e7, takes, and after and in this move, after bishop takes on e7, f takes e7, and in this position, black is fine because black has taken the pawns close to promotion, and white will have to spend a few more moves before they're able to promote pawns. So here this position's holding, and black doesn't even have to take on e7 right away. Black can just play a move like knight c5 or even maybe knight e5 first as well, and then they can just go forward for their own promotion plans. Then eventually white will probably take on d2, so white will still carry a slight advantage in this position, but it is not winning, and as the engine thinks more, the engine shows that it is not winning for white. But if you were to go back to here, back to what I showed in the last video where this move is an inaccuracy here, I think I only showed bishop takes g6, but if the rook takes g6 here, the reason why this is still inaccurate is because here white is one move ahead, so black doesn't have time to play bishop d6 because black will run into h4 h5 attacking this bishop before black can take on e7. So black will play bishop f7 to avoid the h5 attacking the bishop. White will play bishop e3, and after bishop d6 and h5, now if black were to take on e7, which black can do, this position is a little bit different because if black takes on e7, white is already, like, they've already pushed these pawns more up the board than in the bishop e3 line. If I were to go back to the bishop e3 line, bishop takes g6, and the key difference here is that black didn't play this bishop f7 move, which took an additional tempo. So in this line, if we go back here, knight h4, rook h8, h4, if there's no bishop f7 played, then here there's just h5. And if black were to move the bishop now, now white has g6. So going all the way back. So before I move to other lines in the theory, after bishop e3, rook hg8, white has a few options. So if white continues on the theme of taking on g6, this move just should transpose. I guess this move is fine, but it's not too much of a threat. We saw a similar line to this in my previous video where white was just better, but this line is not as good for white just because white spent an extra tempo in this line, putting the bishop on e3, and tempos are everything in this position. So here white is able to take on d2 though. And black's able to take on g5, and now white starts to push these pawns towards motion, and white still, in each line, normally white's going to have some advantage in the line, because white has the first move, but it's not winning. If we go back over here, so we've covered bishop takes g6 and knight takes g6. White can now, the other move is just to take on d2 right away, which is kind of what bishop e3 was hinting at. After bishop takes d2, c takes d2, bishop takes g6 transposes to what we just showed earlier. So yeah, and actually that transposes, and knight takes also transposes. So this bishop takes d2 line actually transposes to taking on g6 line. So then the last thing to show on this line is bishop f4, which after bishop f4, I guess this move is a playable move, and the idea behind bishop f4, why it's playable, is because we're stopping black from taking on e7 because the bishop is pinned to the king. But this video is mainly for other lines in knight h4, so I just wanted to clarify that from the last video. This video is going to be on other lines. So let's start with knight f4. Knight f4, and after rook hg8, we run into the same issue with bishop takes g6. So, and bishop takes f4 is also a bad move because, like I said in the previous video, we're just helping white move that pawn forward towards the promotion. So that leaves bishop d6 to be played, and knight takes g6, rook hg8 transposes to what I showed in the last video. So the move here is h4 to be different from the previous line. After h4, there are two main moves, knight c5 and knight a5. After knight a5, there are a couple of moves that white can play. So the first thing, white can just play knight takes g6, h5, and this kind of transposes to, again, lines that I showed in the last video. Here we have rook ab1. White can play that to defend, but then black can just take with the bishop, similar to what I've showed in the other videos. Though in this particular line, this is better for white than in the other line, just because other line showed a similar variation, but it was on black side where the pawn was on f7. But in this position, white is up a tempo. Um, so this can be played as well. Mhm. The main move here is knight c5 though. So rook a b1, similar things, and I think it's not completely in the spirit of the position to kind of defend the pawn with the rook and the bishop, because the other side is just going to be taking the pawn anyways. So in this position we have two moves. So bishop takes g6 can be played. It'll run into bishop takes b3. White will play bishop e3 to break up black's pawns, and as you can see, this position is fairly balanced. So the other move that can be played in this position is going to be knight takes g6, because bishop takes g6 runs into bishop takes b3. Now in this position we have rook h g8 and f4, knight takes b3, rook a b1, knight a5. And I'm going through these moves fairly quickly because they're very similar to knight h4 lines. So, but in this position it's a little bit different because the bishop on, yeah, I think this position is slightly different. We had some bishop f5 in a line in this opening, but in this particular position, knight e5 can be played. After knight e5, the knight is attacking this f7 bishop and threatening to play f7 in some lines. The best move is just to take and then play b3. Bishop goes to f5, c2 is played. White plays bishop e3. Black brings in the knight, and white can take and take back, and black continues pushing the pawns. In this position, white is a little bit better because they took black's pawns that were close to promotion. White still has pawns that they can push, and they'll probably play g6 next. They have a little bit more pawns closer to promotion, which is why they're still going to be slightly better in a position like this, but such is the case in these theory lines. So if we go back, I went through these lines quickly. Please see the first video for going through it. We'll go through the lines in more in depth because in concept, because in both knight f4 and knight h4 lines, the bishop or the knight will be taking on g6. These lines generally transpose, and so we saw them either completely transposed or almost completely transposed to knight h4 lines. And so in this video I just want to cover the remaining theory lines. So we've covered knight h4 and knight f4. Bishop e3 is a move that white can start with, so that's another theory move. So we saw that previously being played after knight h4, bishop d6, and then bishop e3, but white can start one bishop e3. Here black goes for knight c5, white goes h4 and bishop d6, and the lines kind of almost identically transpose, but they're similar. And in this line, I think it's better for white to play knight h4 and then bishop e3 instead of just bishop e3, because I think there's more threats and white will get a slightly bigger advantage with those lines. So bishop e3 is just a sideline that just mixes up the move order a little bit. But probably one of the other things that people do when they first see this position is they'll probably try to play f4 or h4 right away. So let's cover those. After one h4, black will play again knight c5. So c5 is generally the best square for that black knight. This is more centralized, and normally bishop taking here is not good. So after uh, knight c5, right now it's showing bishop takes c5 as the top move, but once the engine thinks more, that move won't be the best. So, or will it be the best? Let's see. But yeah, when I put these theory lines together, I normally let the engine think to like at least high 20s or maybe even depth 30 or beyond. So rook a b1 is played and bishop takes b3. So again, we're kind of seeing the same theme where it doesn't really matter that the rook is defending that pawn, the other side can just take. In this position, I guess white still has a slight advantage because white is, it's also all about tempo, this position, or tempi. So white allowed black to do those takings, and then white is able to defend the back rank, and white is up one more tempo than in some previous lines where black was losing when they played this kind of setup, where it was white with the pawn on f7 and the two rooks on g8 and e8. So it's about tempo as well. Of course, that's not the only move that that can be played. So there's not too much theory then to go over with h4 line because black just takes over here. But if we do show the line of white taking on c5 in this position, I guess white only has one move, which is to go h5 here. And you can see once the engine is like going into the line further, it's kind of changing its evaluation, because generally we don't want to be taking that knight because it just moves the pawn forward more. I think in this one position the engine is showing that it's fine, which is why I wanted to kind of go into this. But so after c4, which is the natural conclusion of that, h takes g6, bishop e6, b takes c4, g4, g7. Now bishop b6 check, e3, rook hg8. And I'm just playing like the moves on the board. And yeah, this seems like it's playable for both sides. If I go back over here, I also noticed that black can take on h5 as well. But probably white will just play they take on h5. Yeah, probably white will just play g6 in this position, which is fine. But black didn't need to spend the extra tempo. So now white is just should have a slight advantage in this position. So taking on h5 is not the most accurate move here. And yeah, that's so actually bishop takes c5 in this particular position is fine. So for h5 perhaps, so that's how we kind of look for more theory and how we can see, okay, maybe knight a5 is fine in this position. Yeah, it should be fine here because black will do the same thing and they will just take on b3 in a position like this, and we've kind of gone over those lines already. See, always something new. So that's the h4, and again, I'm not going over these lines in too much depth because you can see there's so much overlap in the themes, because this is more about themes than specific theory, but just because it's so tactical, there is always going to be some specific theory. And yeah, in this f4, I have a note here that knight h4 follows after each move, so it transposes to knight h4 lines. So if you've covered that, the only other things to cover are a couple other lines that are side lines. So rook a b1 is a move, and this used to be a move, either rook a b1 or rook d b1, that's like a prophylactic move because white is anticipating black to go with their pawns forward, so white just proactively defends the b3 pawn, and it's a move that's going to be played in most lines anyways. So it's kind of a move that white would play that doesn't show their hand, but also improves the position. But as we've seen, it doesn't really stop black from taking on b3 anyways. So now I would say that this move is now just a sideline. So I don't really have too much theory in this position, just because I don't think that this rook AB1 move really offers too much. Now that the idea of the move to just defend the b3 pawn is not it's not super important now, because black can just go in and, like, for example, they can just go in and take on b3 here. But here it's showing, yeah, maybe the engine does have to think a little bit over here first before it says that this is not very good. Yeah. And same thing for rook db1. Actually, rook db1 used to be, yeah, white has no advantage in this line after, for example, a5, because we're moving the wrong rook to b1. Like, this rook would probably want to take here, but actually db1 used to be a really good first move back when the kings were on a8 and h1, because there was always threats of, like, bishop takes b6 if black's bishop were to move, and then rook takes a7, but now the king is not lined up over there. And actually in the main line where we have knight h4 and then bishop d6 is like the best move, and the only move that technically is like brings advantage to within +1. That move would not be possible if the king was on a8, because then the bishop would just take here on b6. So in all, that's kind of just the main theory for the lunar eclipse position. So in all, it kind of just transposes in general. So it's really more about the pawn races, about the themes, and piece sacrificing, piece attacking, defensive sacrifices, in between moves, gaining space, replacing lost pawns with new strong pawns, and it's more thematic. But I just, in this video, going over some of the theory that you can see in this position, which demonstrates those main themes, and just some interesting things to see in these positions that are so dynamic, because all of a sudden piece values are relative, and you can sacrifice pieces. You can give up a rook for a pawn, or you could have like an advanced pawn, where we saw in, like, especially in the last video, some lines where like pawns capturing a rook even was not the best move. It was best to keep the pawn there because the pawn was stronger than the opponent's rook. So this opens up a new way to think about chess. But yeah, this is it basically for the theory in the lunar eclipse position. And if there's any other updates, I would make further videos.